fast because you literally are just trying to do one thing. Like in this moment, I want to click on this thing and expand it. That's all I want to do. And React is saying like, no, you can't do that. Like if you're going to add this code, you are going to think about every way that this can change right now from the beginning. And so that's a lot. But because we happen to be using this use measure code to calculate the width and the height of the dynamic sized elements, it worked out in that case. For that edge case that we would not have considered, the programming model did force us to consider it. And so that is the fruits of the declarative effectful programming model at work. So that's an example of it working. But there was also, you have to weigh that against all the bugs that we introduced and all the time we spent accommodating the different situations that we didn't care at all about, but we were forced to deal with because of effects running every single render.
Yep. I think there's tension here between like, listen, me as a programmer, I know what my component should do at every single step. And then there's also, on the other side, there's React saying,
you don't.
you don't. You're actually introducing bugs, and we are going to force you into this model that makes you consider it. And listen, at the end of the day, you're
going to write more correct code.
Yeah, you do end up with better code. The problem is was that worth it?
Yeah.
And I don't know. Like, I can't answer that. Right? It's like different for everyone.
That's super interesting. But I mean, I think that's a great way to phrase it. In some sense, it is forcing you to write more correct code. But if what does it mean? Is it always worth it to write more correct code? No. There's like it's not a black and white thing. Of course not. No. There's all sorts of bugs in code that we've written before. Untyped language like JavaScript. I mean, there's all sorts of things that could happen there. So I would say if it's like a Pareto improvement, like in economics, a situation is a Pareto improvement if at least someone is better off and no one's worse off. So if you get to the point in React where you have enough libraries such that the things you would use effect for can be provided by hooks and you are just as productive as you were before, but now you're accounting for edge cases that you wouldn't have before. So you're not worse off, but there are edge cases that are better off. Then we can say maybe conclusively like it's a better programming model.
Yeah. I think if we get to a point where like what I was talking about, like you have this static list of users from the server and then you're buffering your changes in some other state. And that's too hard for people to do on their own. Well, at least it's too hard.
I mean, maybe people aren't doing that. Maybe we're doing that because we're like learning this stuff deeply. But
they're
like,
absolutely not doing it. What they're doing is they're adding an effect
React query
with
or whatever.
zero. No, they're adding an effect with an empty dependency array. You go on Stack Overflow.
How do you know they're not just using Apollo? Okay, Stack Overflow.
You go on Stack Overflow and seriously go on Stack Overflow, search React hooks, and bring up the first 10 things that use effect, and they will all have use effect with an empty array. People,
even if there are dependencies being ignored,
they're ignoring.
Even if there are dependencies.
There are dependencies. They're ignoring them because what they really want.
I'm saying there's not always dependencies in an effect. Like an effect with an empty dependency array is not ipso facto of a violation of the lint rule.
Right. I'm saying
it's a violation once you bring in
yes.
state or a function, anything that is changing.
Yeah, anything that can change. Yeah, there are things in there that can change. They just want to express their code as when the component mounts, I want to fetch data.
I see.
I want to edit that data.
What do they do? They add a lint ignore rule or something?
I honestly, I don't even know if people use a lint rule because there's it's not commented out. And so I just want to, I want to layer more on here. So, I think there's something interesting. If I go back to the example about like the function changing, causing the effect to run, your mental model as a developer is like that function wraps up business logic, right? How to fetch a user. That function, like from you cannot change, right? Changing that function,
the same thing every time it runs.
Changing that function requires a redeploy and a page refresh.
Like
your model is that it can't change, but however, it actually could change. You can imagine like there's a million ways it could change. Like maybe the implementation of how it fetches data changes from like HTTP requests to a WebSocket. There's,
based on a browser or something like that.
There's a million, but your mental model is like, no, this is how I fetch a user. It's not changing.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely tension there where I just want to ignore this thing. I know it's not going to change. It's
the fact that the way JavaScript works is forcing you to think about it as if it were a changing thing, when in reality, well, let's read this really quick. Use callback. Returns a memoized callback. Pass an inline callback and array of dependencies. Use callback will return a memoized version of the callback that only changes if one of the dependencies has changed. This is useful when passing callbacks to optimize child components that rely on reference equality to prevent unnecessary renders. Yeah, so that I was thinking I was going to say something different, but that is about preventing unnecessary renders. Note the array of dependencies is not passed as arguments. Conceptually, though, that's what they represent. Every value referenced inside the callback should also appear in the dependencies array. So even there, you couldn't necessarily avoid it if you have to pass in dependencies.
No, because what you do is you get a memoized function back. So that function is the user ID is changing, but the function is not changing. So it's actually the behavior that you originally wanted. But I don't know. I don't like this answer because
it doesn't seem like a good answer.
If I'm using a library that doesn't use callback or has a buggy use callback or just...
It doesn't even matter. It shouldn't... It doesn't... I mean, if it's not about preventing unnecessary renders, that's not what this is about at all.
Yeah.
It's not about that.
Yeah.
It's just not about that. Man, that's what this says it's useful for. That's the reason this exists.
Yeah. It's not about preventing unnecessary renders. It's preventing unnecessary effects from running is what we're interested in.
Yeah, exactly. So